This is a full story. Kitten wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. I took care of Hailey, who was blind, for 3 years. The first thing she did after regaining her sight was to find her ex-boyfriend and propose to him in a grand gesture. When the media asked me about my thoughts on their upcoming wedding, I looked into the camera and sincerely said, "I wish you both a happy marriage." Yet, she came to me in the pouring rain, begging me not to leave her. Lying in my hospital bed, I watched the news that had been trending for days. Tony, the heir of the E-group, had finally settled down, accepting a public proposal from his girlfriend. The couple's unwavering love over 5 years moved countless netizens. Many envied Hailey, calling her a real-life Cinderella who had found her prince. The media praised Hailey for her courage in proposing on one knee, holding a ring for her boyfriend. In the video, her eyes were sparkling and still so beautiful. It was my first time seeing her eyes after she regained her sight. I turned off my phone and flushed the prepared ring down the toilet. That evening, I was discharged from the hospital. After all, it was just a minor injury. I had been too anxious looking for Hailey and didn't notice the electric bike beside me. If it weren't for seeing that live romantic proposal on the mall's screen, I wouldn't have ended up in the hospital. I went home. The house was pitch dark and eerily quiet, with only the ticking of the clock breaking the silence. This was Hailey's and my home, or so I thought it was. 3 years ago, after her accident, Tony left the country. I brought her here and took care of her. Normally, when I returned, Hailey would come out of the bedroom. She'd ask if I was tired, then I'd cook dinner. We'd either lie on the couch or I'd play the piano while she softly hummed along. 3 years passed in a flash, and in the end, I was left alone. I turned on the lights. Every edge of the tables and chairs in the house was covered with fabric. In fact, not just the furniture. Every sharp corner in the house had been cushioned. I was afraid Hailey might get hurt. Even though she was familiar with the house, I still worried. I let out a bitter laugh and started tearing off the fabric. Her eyes had healed. She didn't need this protection anymore. In my haste, my finger hit the corner of a table. It hurt, a sharp pain that made my chest tighten. See? Hailey said it wasn't necessary to cover them, but it hurt this much. How could I not cover them? The door opened from the outside. I turned around and saw Hailey standing there. She wore a red dress, her lips painted a bright red, Tony's favorite color. "You're here." "Yeah." I continued tearing off the fabric. She walked quickly towards me. Her high heels barely made a sound on the carpet. Standing in front of me, she watched as I tore away the last bit of fabric, revealing the sharp edges beneath. A few seconds passed before she suddenly chuckled. "Makes sense. I don't need it anymore anyway." "Yeah." After finishing, I went to my room to pack. Having lived here for 3 years, there was quite a bit of stuff, but not much of it mattered. When I came out dragging my suitcase, Hailey was sitting on the sofa. She had been there for over 2 hours. Seeing me with the suitcase, she walked over quickly. Her neck stiffened. "You don't have to leave. This is your house." "I'll go. I'm selling the house." Her face turned pale, and her lips trembled. You just want to erase our past, don't you?" "I never wanted to erase anything. Don't you?" I asked back. I had known her for 10 years. She had always been strong-willed, striving for perfection. But in these 3 years, she could do nothing. She needed help even to eat or use the restroom. Except for hospital visits, she rarely went out. She didn't want anyone to see her vulnerable side. It was her lowest point. These 3 years must have been the memory she most wanted to erase. She stared at me, her facial muscles twitching slightly. Suddenly, she grabbed her bag from the sofa and said, "Throw away my things." Then she slammed the door and left. It wasn't long before I also left. I met Hailey when I was 13. I was kidnapped at 5, and it took my parents 10 years to find me. Even though I returned to my childhood home, I felt no sense of belonging. Despite my parents' kindness, the unfamiliarity lingered. Hailey's parents were close friends with mine, so she often visited. She slowly helped me open up and adapt to my family. When I was 15, Hailey's family went bankrupt. Before I could even comfort her, they moved away in haste. Ever since then, I had been looking for her. I agreed to join my family's business so I could help her better. I got into the same school as her, becoming her junior. But when we reunited, she was no longer the same. She didn't smile as much and often wore a cold expression, except when she was with Tony. People described her as distant and unapproachable. It broke my heart. She used to be so warm and full of life. Tony had a wealthy background, and Hailey became adorned in luxury again. But when she had her car accident and was hospitalized, Tony never showed up. Her parents were gone, and she had no one. I couldn't stand it, so I took care of her despite my family's objections. They wanted me to join the company, but I refused to leave Hailey. They kicked me out, and I supported myself by singing and playing piano in bars and restaurants while caring for her and helping her recover her sight. During that time, her temper was terrible, and she often lashed out. The faint scars on my face and hands still serve as reminders. She wanted once said she was like a swan with broken wings, alive but meaningless. When the doctor said there was a good chance she could regain her sight, she asked me, "Aren't you afraid I'll leave once I'm healed?" I was never afraid of her leaving. I was only afraid she wouldn't be happy, that she'd remain in despair. As I closed the door behind me, I looked at the place where I had spent 3 years of my life. A friend who knew about Hailey invited me to see a musical to relax. I hadn't been out for a long time. These years with Hailey had been financially tight. Looking back, I could understand why she left. That kind of life was hard for anyone. My friend suddenly tapped my shoulder. "Isn't that Tony and Hailey? What a coincidence." I looked over. They were seated a few rows ahead. I shook my head. That's not them. Even though their backs were strikingly similar, I recognized immediately that it wasn't Hailey. But when the man turned to adjust the woman's hair, I saw his side profile. It was Tony, yet the woman beside him wasn't Hailey. After the show, I hurried to follow them. Tony was protective of the woman, treating her with care I'd never seen him show Hailey. When her shoelace came undone, he knelt to tie it for her. Was this really the Tony I knew? When the woman turned around, I froze. She looked exactly like Hailey, like they were twins. Just as I was about to catch up with them to ask what was going on, my phone rang. It was my sister calling to tell me that my dad had been hospitalized and that I needed to come immediately. My heart leapt into my throat and I rushed to the hospital, where my sister was waiting for me at the entrance. "How's Dad?" She sighed. "You'll see when you go in." My hands were trembling uncontrollably and a wave of fear wrapped around me, leaving my mind blank. But as soon as I opened the hospital room door, I saw my dad sitting on the bed, happily eating fruit. "Dad?" He looked at me, put the fruit down on the table, and his expression turned serious. My mom got up, came over, hugged me tightly, and started crying while lightly hitting me. "How could you be so heartless, refusing to come home for so long?" My sister chuckled. "It was Dad who wanted to see you, so he came up with this clumsy excuse. Even I got scared." My dad huffed and glared at her. "Who said that? I'm actually sick." My sister burst out laughing. Sure. A fever of 37 degrees Celsius is definitely an illness." My dad's face turned red and he stiffened his neck, refusing to speak further. My mom's tears dampened my chest. "I'm sorry." The room fell silent and my parents looked at me. I stepped forward and suddenly knelt in front of my dad. "Son, what are you doing?" My mom tried to pull me up, but my sister held her back. "Dad, Mom, I'm sorry. I was so wrong." My dad threw off the blanket, got out of bed, and grabbed my arm to pull me up. His eyes were red, glistening with unshed tears. They had aged so much. My dad's hair was turning white, and my mom's face was lined with wrinkles. It hit me then. I hadn't been home or seen my parents in 3 years. The guilt washed over me like a flood, making my chest ache and my nose sting. My dad patted my shoulder. "It's not just you. I was too harsh back then." We all froze, surprised to hear him apologize. He'd always been so strong-willed and unyielding. My heart ached even more. But then he suddenly barked, "If you dare cry, I'll break your legs." I quickly sniffed and said, "I'm not crying. I never said I would." My mom stepped closer, her eyes full of hope. "Come home, son. Do whatever you want from now on. We won't interfere anymore." I held her hand and wiped away her tears. "Okay, I promise I'll be more considerate in the future." Half an hour later, my dad was discharged from the hospital. Back home, I sought out my sister for answers. She and Tony were university classmates, so she should know something. When I asked, she sighed and said, "That woman's name is Alice." Alice came from an ordinary family and was Tony's tutor. Naturally, Tony's family didn't approve of their relationship and forcibly sent Alice abroad. I was puzzled. Then why did he get involved with Hailey? My sister shook her head. "That's what they call a stand-in for the white moonlight. Got it?" Though Tony was often surrounded by gossip, I hadn't expected his character to be so despicable. While he was publicly engaged to Hailey, he was secretly with Alice. Later at the hospital, when I was picking up my dad's medical records, I ran into Tony, who was accompanying Alice. To my surprise, Alice was already pregnant. "Tony, do you even realize you're about to get married?" He saw me and, without any guilt, smirked. "So what? So what?" Hailey's tearful face flashed in my mind, her kneeling as she held out the ring. Rage surged through me, and before I knew it, I had punched him to the ground. Alice screamed and rushed to help him up. Tony reassured her with a pat on the hand and stood up, shielding her behind him. My sister had said Tony loved Alice. Now I believed it. Every movement he made screamed his protectiveness for her. "Rocky, don't meddle in my and Hailey's affairs," he warned, "or I might just refuse to marry her. What if she blames you for that?" He left with Alice in his arms, but he was right. He knew Hailey better than I did, because soon after, Hailey came to me. "Why did you hit Tony? Do you even realize he's about to be my husband?" I stared into her angry eyes. "Do you know he's with Alice? They're having a child together." Smack. Her slap came so fast I didn't even react relaxed until I felt the sting on my cheek. Her nails had left a cut, and the burning sensation spread through my face. But the sharp pain from the wound pierced deeper. "Rocky, this is the last time I'm telling you. Stay out of my business." I looked at the blood on my fingers and, instead of getting angry, began to laugh. "Don't worry, I won't anymore." When I left, Hailey was still standing there. The driver opened the car door and glanced at her. He recognized her too. What happened to that sweet girl she used to be? I looked back at her through the window. She stood under a birch tree, silhouetted against the light. Her long dress clung to her figure in the breeze, making her look thin and lonely. The driver sighed. Hailey used to be such a lovely child. What a shame. I thought of the 16-year-old Hailey. She used to sit and watch me, sometimes on a bench, sometimes on the grass. She always said she wished people could just sit down and talk things through. Her parents had been at odds for as long as she could remember, always fighting like roosters. Sitting down to talk wasn't even a consideration, and not fighting was already a luxury. That's why she loved coming to my house. Suddenly, I felt a sense of release. It was as if something heavy inside me had dissipated. At that moment, I finally understood. Hailey wasn't coming back. The 16-year-old Hailey was never coming back. The next morning, the housekeeper told me Hailey was here and wanted to see me. My parents exchanged a glance but said nothing, retreating to their room. Hailey had dressed simply and tied her hair into a high ponytail, just the way my mom liked it. She still remembered. "I'm sorry." She reached out to touch my face, but I dodged, and she awkwardly pulled her hand back. "I lost my temper yesterday. I couldn't sleep all night. I really regret hitting you." I sighed. "I don't blame you. If anything, I was grateful for that slap. Without it, I wouldn't have found this newfound peace." "That's good." We sat together, but there was nothing left to say. Finally, I asked, "How are things with Tony?" Her lips curved into a smile, one of a bride-to-be. "He owes me his life. He won't refuse to marry me." I was about to ask her what she meant, but she got up to leave. "Rocky, thank you." She left, and it seemed like she was crying. My mom's 60th birthday was approaching, and I got busy with preparations. Hailey's matters were completely cast out of my mind. "Well, you're working pretty fast." That voice sounded so familiar. I turned around abruptly and saw Serena standing behind me. She was pulling a suitcase and started laughing as soon as she saw me. "Why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" Caught off guard by her glare, I quickly recovered and explained, "It's been so long since I saw you. I almost didn't recognize you." She snorted and suddenly stepped closer to me. Startled, I immediately dodged. She frowned. "Am I a tiger or something?" My shoulder ached faintly. If not a tiger, she was something close. Her temper had always been fiery. My shoulder still bore the scar from when she bit me once. That mark was still vivid even now. Remembering it sent a chill down my spine. My sister walked over. Serena's a fashion designer now. She designed all the clothes for Mom and Dad's birthday banquet this time. I still remembered seeing her off when she went abroad, but traffic was bad that day, and by the time I arrived, she had already gone. Who would have thought she'd call me as soon as she got off the plane, cursing me out over the phone? And just like that, she started crying halfway through scolding me, so I had to coax her. In short, 2 words summed up Serena for me: high maintenance. "Serena's staying in the room next to yours. Show her the way." "Got it." I took her suitcase. "You've aged a lot over the years." I rolled my eyes. I knew she was my nemesis. "Sure, as long as you're still gorgeous." She giggled. After setting up her room, she handed me a beautifully crafted box. "A gift for you." It was a brooch, exquisitely designed with a sapphire, my favorite. "This is the first piece of jewelry I designed. Nobody wanted it, so I'm giving it to you." We were all used to her sharp tongue. "Should I kneel and thank you then?" Serena nodded matter-of-factly. "Of course. Get out of here." Since Serena arrived, there'd been a lot more laughter at home. I almost forgot that despite her bad temper, she was the life of the party. Wherever she was, joy seemed to follow. In the days that followed, she filled up my schedule completely. We strolled through our old high school campus without saying much. The silence grew awkward, so I commented, "The school hasn't changed much, has it?" Serena didn't let me off the hook. "Are your eyes okay? This place looks totally different." I rolled my eyes, annoyed. "But back then, you'd never just quietly walk with me like this." True enough, Serena and I had known each other since we were kids, but our personalities were worlds apart. I didn't like talking, while she never stopped. I used to avoid her constantly, but the more I avoided her, the more she sought me out. It became a game of cat and mouse between us. Looking back now, I had to admire her energy. She was like a little sun, always shining, always warm. It was something I lacked, something I envied. "Do you still have that scar?" I nodded. "Of course. You almost took a chunk out of me." She pursed her lips. "Did I ever apologize for that?" "No need. It's been so long." She huffed. "I wasn't planning on apologizing anyway." Her expression made me laugh. "If it weren't for Hailey, I wouldn't have bitten you." That was true. She had stopped stopped me from going after Hailey that time. We got into a heated argument, and she bit me out of frustration. She glanced at me cautiously. Hailey's getting married. I nodded in acknowledgement. Seeing that I wasn't reacting much, she let out a quiet sigh of relief. Serena was always observant. Sometimes she understood my emotions better than Hailey did. But back then, her vivacious and spoiled nature made it hard to associate her with sensitivity. When we returned home together, my parents couldn't stop smiling. My mom adored Serena. She loved cheerful, outgoing kids. Unfortunately, neither of her two daughters had that kind of personality. Serena, thank you so much for your help this time. You must be exhausted. Serena glanced at me. Not at all. Rocky's been helping me, and I'm so happy to see you and Uncle again. So sweet. That's how my mom fell for her charm step by step. On the day of the birthday banquet, the house was full of relatives and friends. Serena and I felt out of place, so we sat in a corner. She pointed at one guest's suit. Look at that, the colorful black. Then she gestured to another guest's dress. And that gown? I'd bet money the designer got their inspiration from a vegetable garden. With her commentary, that dress really did resemble a cabbage. I tried my best to hold back laughter, but the more inappropriate the occasion, the harder it was to resist. Isn't that Hailey? Serena patted my shoulder. I turned to see Hailey looking at me, with Tony by her side. Serena was right. Tony had agreed to marry her again. Hailey's gaze shifted to Serena, and she slowly walked over. She came straight to my side and tried to hold my arm, but I stepped aside. Her hand hung awkwardly in the air for a long moment. Rocky, come here for a second. My sister called to me. I glanced at Serena, and she nodded, so I went over. My sister wanted to introduce me to some musicians, and after a round of small talk, I decided to head back to Serena. Just as I turned around, I saw Hailey pouring a large glass of red wine down Serena's neckline. What are you doing? Hailey looked at me with a wronged expression. I slipped. I didn't mean to. Slipped? I saw you pour the wine. Hailey's eyes turned red as she stubbornly straightened her back. I didn't mean it. Apologize. What? I repeated, apologize. Then I took off my suit jacket and draped it over Serena. Her white dress was stained bright red. Hailey stared at me in disbelief. You want me to apologize to her? I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. When you do something wrong, shouldn't you apologize? Her face turned pale, her long lashes trembling. Our commotion had drawn the attention of many guests. Hailey looked to Tony for help, but he ignored her and continued chatting with a pretty woman nearby. Her fists clenched tightly, nails digging into her palms. Tears welled up in her eyes, but refused to fall. I'm sorry. With that, she ran out of the room. I took Serena upstairs to clean up. Once there, Serena started laughing. I did that on purpose. What do you mean, on purpose? She pointed at the wine stain on her dress. I didn't dodge on purpose. I wanted to see if you'd still defend her like before. Her reasoning made me laugh in exasperation. What kind of logic is that? She raised her eyebrows smugly. I swore to myself that if you sided with her again, I'd never speak to you for the rest of my life. Did I always side with Hailey before? I couldn't remember. In my memory, Hailey had never done anything wrong. So, did I pass your little test? I lowered my head, meeting her lively, sparkling eyes. And what's my reward if I did? She tilted her head in thought, looking adorably serious. I couldn't resist ruffling her hair. Her ears turned bright red, but she didn't swat my hand away like she used to. I've got it. I thought of a reward. What is it? Out of nowhere, she stood on her tiptoes and kissed me on the cheek. The reward is you're allowed to pursue me. My heart raced and my face grew hot. She nudged my arm, snapping me out of my daze. What's wrong? Don't you want to pursue me? Her tone was teasing, but her eyes were serious. I do. Her smile widened. Good. That's more like it. Over the next few days, Serena and I spent a lot of time together, and our relationship grew closer. But I didn't expect to be swarmed by reporters when I went to deliver something to my sister's company. The incident at the banquet, when I made Hailey apologize to Serena, had been caught on camera and posted online. Although it was quickly taken down, plenty of people had already seen it. Mr. Rocky, do you have any conflict with Miss Hailey? No, we're just friends. The reporters exchanged glances and pressed further. But your attitude toward her that day didn't seem very friendly. I was just overwhelmed at the moment and didn't pay attention to my tone. I apologize for that. They quickly shifted the topic to Tony and Hailey's wedding. Do you have any well wishes for them? I looked directly into the camera and spoke earnestly. I wish them a happy marriage. My simple congratulations spread like wildfire, causing quite a headache for my family. The only silver lining was that it inadvertently boosted publicity for my sister's company. As for the apartment I used to share with Hailey, I decided to put it up for sale. file. Before handing it over to the agent, I had to go back to check if I'd left anything valuable behind. Walking into the building, I felt like a lifetime had passed. The elevator ads hadn't changed, but they seemed like relics from another era. As soon as I opened the door, the smell of alcohol hit me. Hailey was sitting in the living room, surrounded by empty beer bottles. Her face was flushed, her eyes dazed. She looked up sluggishly at the sound of the door. "Rocky, you're back?" She stumbled toward me, barefoot, and threw herself into my arms. "Aren't you tired?" Her voice was soft, just like how she used to greet me when I came home. "Rocky, I want to eat your cooking. Anything is fine. I'm easy to please, right?" She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "Actually, even if I don't marry Tony, I'll be fine, right?" Before I could respond, she broke down, tears falling onto my hand. "Why did you wish me a happy marriage? Do you really want me to marry Tony? Was that your honest wish?" I nodded. "Yes." She collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I'd never seen her like this before, not even during her illness. I stood there, unsure of what to do. "Why? Why would you wish me a happy marriage?" she demanded, clutching my hand as if searching for an answer. "That's just something friends say to each other. Don't overthink it," I replied. She sat there in a daze, muttering the word friends over and over. I helped her to her feet. "Let me take you home. You've got a wedding tomorrow, don't you?" She suddenly grabbed my collar. "Rocky, do you not love me anymore?" Her gaze pierced through me, filled with a mix of desperation and hope. I nodded. "I don't. Just thinking about you makes me feel exhausted. Like you said, love can wear away." Her grip loosened, and she stood motionless, staring blankly at the ground. "Well, am I interrupting something?" Tony leaned against the doorframe, a smug grin on his face. The lipstick stain on his collar was glaringly obvious. He glanced at me with a sneer. "If you two need more time, feel free to reschedule. There's a wedding tomorrow, after all." I frowned, but before I could say anything, Hailey walked past me and went straight to Tony. Tony shot me a smug look before leading her away. That night, Serena was waiting for me at home. She sniffed the air around me and frowned. "Why do you smell like alcohol?" I hesitated, unsure if I should tell her about Hailey. Before I could decide, she asked, "Did you see Hailey? Were you drinking with her?" No, I quickly clarified. "I didn't drink." Under her skeptical gaze, I relented and recounted the entire encounter. When I finished, she looked at me with concern. "Do you think Tony will treat her well?" She was worried about Hailey. My heart softened. How could I forget how compassionate Serena was? "Why are you looking at me like that?" I smiled. "You're amazing." Himph, just realizing now, it was late, but better than never. The next day was Hailey and Tony's wedding. Tony's family had sent invitations, and my parents couldn't go. My sister had work, so Serena and I were the only ones free to attend. "Are you really okay with this?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I laughed. "I told you I've moved on. If I hadn't, I wouldn't be pursuing you." "All right," she said softly, leaning her head on my shoulder. When we arrived, the wedding venue was already crowded. Tony stood with his parents, greeting guests with a polite smile. When he saw me, his smile didn't falter, but his eyes turned cold. "Enjoy yourselves," he said, shaking my hand. Serena nudged me. "See that? He's perfected the art of fake smiling." I thought of my sister, who often wore the same strained smile during business meetings. The host began recounting Tony and Hailey's love story, painting Tony as a devoted partner who cared for Hailey through her blindness and saved her from despair. The audience, familiar with the truth, remained indifferent. Only a young girl, perhaps 10 years old, was moved to tears. Hailey's side of the guest seating was conspicuously empty. It felt deliberate, like an insult. The doors opened, and Hailey walked in wearing a traditional red wedding gown. It wasn't the white dress she dreamed of. Even the wedding itself was nothing she wanted. She walked down the aisle alone. Without parents, there was no one to give her away. The ceremony proceeded smoothly until the ring exchange. Tony suddenly froze, his eyes darting to the crowd. Following his gaze, everyone turned to see a visibly pregnant Hailey standing there. Hailey panicked and hurriedly put the ring on herself, but Tony's gaze was already glued to Alice. He took 2 steps forward, only to be held back by Hailey. "Tony, it's almost over. Just hold on a little longer." Alice smiled at Tony, though tears streamed down her pale cheeks. She slowly walked closer and looked up at him on the stage. "So, is this how it ends? You're abandoning me and the baby?" Tony blinked nervously, pushing Hailey away to leap down from the stage and stand in front of Alice. He stammered in desperation. "No, it's not like that. Alice laughed bitterly. "I should have known better, but I still chose to trust you. And you? You've been lying to me all along. It's not like that. I was forced into this." He reached out, trembling, trying to wipe Alice's tears, but she dodged him. "Tony, I don't want to see you anymore. We're done." With that, she wiped the tears off her chin in one swift motion and turned to leave. Tony stood there, dumbfounded dumbfounded, his hand brushing the wedding ring as he stared after her. Seconds later, he yanked off the ring and flung it to the ground, chasing after Alice. Hailey reacted swiftly, grabbing him. "Tony, are you going to abandon me?" Tony turned back to her, saying simply, "I'm sorry, but I can't abandon Alice." Hailey shook her head furiously, her voice shrill. "You owe me a life, Tony. If you walk away now, I won't let you off." I was puzzled. Hailey had mentioned before that Tony owed her a life, but I never knew what she meant. Tony shoved her forcefully. "Do whatever you want." Hailey stumbled and fell to the ground. Tony's parents ran after him, shouting, "Son, you can't go. You'll ruin yourself." But Tony didn't listen, sprinting in Alice's direction. Tony's mother broke into tears, then abruptly rushed to Hailey and slapped her face 5 or 6 times. "You useless fool. You can't even hold on to a man." Before I could react, Serena stepped forward furiously. "Everyone knows your son is a philanderer. He got another girl pregnant and still has the audacity to get married. You raise this kind of garbage and you blame others?" I quickly moved to stand by her side. Tony's parents, concerned about appearances, said nothing further and went up on stage to apologize to the guests. Serena pulled Hailey along and I followed them outside. Once we were outside, Hailey rasped, "I need some time alone," so I asked the driver to take her home. "You were like a warrior today," I told Serena. She flexed her arm, showing off her bicep. "I've always been one." I couldn't help but pull her into a hug. "Every day, I discover a new side of you." She hugged me back. "I'm afraid that the more you get to know me, the more you'll fall hopelessly in love with me. I look forward to it." The drama between Hailey and Tony circulated for a few days before dying down. However, Serena was heading to the US soon, and it was hard for me to bear. Her career was there, and she had stayed here for far too long already. After dinner, my dad called me to his study. Once inside, he handed me a stack of documents. "It's happening," I thought. "He's finally asking me to join the family business. These are the materials I've compiled for you. Take a look and decide which school you'd like to attend." "School?" He averted his gaze. "Yeah, back then, you gave up studying abroad for Hailey. Now, here's your chance again. Take it." I flipped through the pages. The first part contained school information, and the latter half was my dad's handwritten notes. "Whichever school you choose, I've outlined how to get in." My nose tingled, and my eyes grew hot. He sighed. "Do whatever you want to do. But remember, when your mom and I pass on, most of the family assets will go to your sister. Don't hold a grudge." I laughed through the lump in my throat. "Of course not." When I told Serena, she was thrilled. Still, I couldn't help feeling awkward. "Isn't it a bit late to be going back to school at 26? She saw through my hesitation. "Chasing your dreams is never too late. You're right. I'll go." Serena left for the US ahead of me. I still had exams and paperwork to handle. The day before my departure, Hailey came to see me. She looked frail, as if a breeze could knock her over. "I've cut all ties with Tony." "That's good." She gazed at me intensely. "I wanted to ask if you could forgive me. Maybe we could start over." I shook my head. "No, I've fallen in love with someone else." "Serena?" "Yes." She let out a bitter laugh. I knew it would be her, but I still had to try. I didn't want to miss the chance. I looked out the window, remaining silent. She continued softly, "Even if Serena weren't in the picture, we wouldn't have worked out, would we?" I nodded. "That's right." She exhaled sharply, feigning nonchalance. "No big deal. I have money now anyway." I frowned in confusion. "Tony gave me $30 million. Not bad, right?" I didn't know how to respond. She laughed through her tears. "This is compensation for my dad's life." I froze. "What do you mean?" "My dad was killed in a car accident caused by Tony." "What?" She had always said her dad died in an accident. I never imagined Tony was the driver. "He promised to marry me and give me shares in his company if I didn't report it. But for Alice, he's even willing to risk prison." She slumped over the table. "At least I have money now. At least I have money. Otherwise, my dad would have died for nothing, don't you think?" Her eyes seemed haunted. Before I could say anything, she put on her sunglasses and murmured goodbye before leaving. I didn't tell anyone to see me off on the day I left. As I boarded the plane, I thought I caught a glimpse of a familiar figure in the crowd. It vanished before I could be sure. I didn't dwell on it, stepping forward into my new journey. In the same city as Serena, I confessed my feelings, and she accepted. Years later, we returned to get married. After we came back, my parents told me that Hailey had killed Tony in a hit-and-run and later extorted him. Both of them ended up in prison. Serena and I sighed at the news, but soon we were back to arranging our wedding venue, bustling with excitement. Hailey had completely exited my life. The end. If you like Kitten's story, please follow and like it. Updated every morning at 9 a.m.